Hey there everybody, back painting with a huge knot, and I'm just starting on my Keisotsu Butai. So I'm gonna go for a grayscale paint with this, where I'm painting grayscale starting with a black undercoat. Partly it's because it makes for quick painting, and partly it's because I just want to show you this kind of method of painting. And so I'm just gonna be blocking in grey carefully. At the moment, yeah, it's like, okay, I'm covering most of the miniature. You could do this as a dry brush. I am choosing not to, because I kind of want it to be a bit more controlled than a dry brush. And I'm going to paint this as a grayscale and tint. So in this process, what you are going to see is everything's going to go grayscale, and it will get lighter and lighter and lighter until all the highlights put in entirely in grayscale, not the entire miniature. And by the time I am done, we will have an entirely highlighted, like, black and white miniature. It looks somewhat like well, black and white photos in some respects. And like I say, you could just dry brush this, but I am choosing to do a kind of fully loaded paintbrush, but in the style of a dry brush. So I'm just trying to pick out, in the case of this dark grey, most surfaces. With each layer of grey, I'll get more and more particular about how I'm doing it. So hopefully what you can see right now is that, okay, I might be missing bits and pieces, but that's fine. That's why we're using the black undercoat, because that'll sit right in all the recesses. And eventually, when this comes up to white, then I'll start introducing tone. So this is a shading and highlight followed by tinting process. So the coloured tints will be added after I've actually painted the miniatures. The reason I'm doing this is because I want each faction to be kind of distinct in the way it's painted, as well as what it looks like. And I think this kind of thing, it will add, I don't know, just a bit of interest. And also, it's so that I don't get bored. At some point I'll do some kind of watercolour style painting as well, working from a white undercoat and tinting the white undercoat back in order to reveal the details. There's some interesting processes from watercolour which, when you apply to miniatures, do some interesting things, and I don't think it's not the kind of thing that's really covered a lot by people. I'm going to keep these as sort of long plays, so you can really see the process that I'm doing. So this, I mean, technically I suppose you could call this base coating, but I'd say that this is toning. Also, this can be quite a quick process. It doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be too fussy, too careful. The other thing is, I'm using greys and I'm going grayscale. Traditionally there are two sort of methods to this, although you could apply the method to any colour palette. So you could, instead of choosing grey, traditionally the alternative would be sepia tones, which is brown scale, if you like. And brown scale gives a certain warmth. When we talk about warmth, what we mean is anything that pushes towards red or yellow. These are warm colours by their nature, although you can have a cold red. This would be like a blue red. If you want to look up a specific reference, the classic sort of cold red is alizarin crimson, which is a very dark sort of burgundy wine-like colour. And then the classic sort of warm red is Indian red or cadmium red, and these are sort of these head towards orange. If you look at for those of you that have, and you look at the hexadecimal scale or on a computer, if you're using a computer software to generate images, if you look, the reds are at like the top and bottom end of the spectrum normally, and at the bottom end they bleed into orange, and at the top end they bleed into purple and into blue, and orange into yellow. So that gives you an idea. So blue is cold, green is cold, well, or thought of as cold. So back to the point, by using a non-chromatic grey scale, you are in the cold end of the spectrum. Now, non-chromatic grey means a pigment which is grey in and of itself, so a flat grey if you like, whereas a chromatic grey is where you mix pigments to neutralise one another to make grey. And this works, I mean, I've mentioned this before, but just because I'm dealing with greys I will explain as thoroughly as I can now. A flat grey like this it's a grey pigment, so it's a neutral pigment. So the way your eye sees is you have a, God, I'm going to get this wrong, I'm sure. Pretty sure your eye has a red, green, blue, grey filter, right? The grey filter is because if you ever see pure white, you will go blind. So your eye always filters everything into Greyscale at the bare minimum. Because it's light that your eyes are dealing with, you have an RGB filter. You have RGB filters, so your eyes. And so some people are colourblind. It's because of the functionality of those filters not working in the kind of the way that they are meant to. But in terms of light consists of is a 3 colour spectrum, which is red, green and blue. So if you use light to make colour, you get RGB. Whereas with pigment, you have yellow, blue and red are equivalent to RGB. So whereas with RGB, I think red and green neutralise one another to form yellow. With pigment, it's a funny quirk of nature really, because it doesn't make sense that these things would operate in a different manner from one another, but they seem to. So in pigment, what happens is you end up with a red, yellow, blue neutralization process. So your red, your yellow and your blue is equivalent to your red, green and blue in light, and this creates a whole load of funny things that occur. But when you're using pigment, if you think your red and your yellows are your warm colours in principle, whereas your blues are your cold colours, but you also have like a warm tone and a cold tone of any colour. So in yellow, your sort of golden yellow, cadmium yellow. Cadmium is not a real colour, by the way. It's a synthetic, entirely synthetic colour, and it's I can't think of it. Golden yellow or yellow ochre. Yellow ochre is a warm yellow. Yellow ochre is sort of it's a mustardy colour, but it's a raw colour. And sort of yellow ochre is also, these are natural pigments, so anything that's called named for sort of a real material is a natural pigment. But if you use these sort of colours to neutralise each other, so you take your sort of alizarin crimson, Indian red, yellow ochre, lemon yellow, Prussian blue, and also cadmium blue or whatever, blue being the most hardest colour to actually make from natural sources. If you take all of these colours, what you end up with, and you put sort of equal amounts of it. It's not, well, it's not actually equal. I think it's equal quantities of pigment, but you have to mess with the colour. You can actually form like a perfect dark grey like this. And that's called a chromatic grey. Whereas this pigment is not chromatic. It's a grey pigment, and that makes it entirely neutral. Now you can tint this pigment with other colours, and that will give it colour. However, with a chromatic grey, it's like you can pull it into any direction, and you can form greys of any part of the grey spectrum. Which isn't really something you can do, and hence you get things like, I was using a warm grey the other day, and it's I'm using Vallejo paints, by the way, and if you look at warm grey in the Vallejo section colour chart or what have you, you will see that it's a kind of pinky colour, and that's why it's called a warm grey. It's a chromatically neutral colour which is then tinted towards the red end of the spectrum. And that is why it's a grey. Now what I'm using here is an entirely neutral grey pigment, is a cold colour, because pure Greyscale, i.e. Sort of charcoal black, true black, hexadecimal black, through to white, as in true white, as in true white's difficult to explain because it's not you can never see true white. True white would be like if you could actually look at the sun without a colour filter in your eye, but like I say, you'd go blind because your eye has a grey filter in it which prevents you from ever seeing true white, because you'd go blind. So as a colour it doesn't really exist, but if you take the whitest sheet of paper or the whitest paint you've ever seen, it's sort of that colour. And so this is a cold thing because it's like if you've ever seen street lights and you see the difference between a halogen light and a normal light, or a SADS light, what's it called, a summer Belvedere deficiency blah 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 thing. SADS, I can't remember what SADS means. It's an acronym. It's an acronym for people who suffer from sun deficiency, basically. If you don't get out in the sun enough, you don't produce vitamin D, you end up with probably some very serious psychological issues as well, as you become massively unhealthy from lack of exposure to the light source you need to generate vitamin D. That's why people like going outside in the sun in the summer. Apart from the sort of historical, political context of the rich used to go abroad to the Mediterranean, and that's when holiday started becoming like, good thing, having a tan became a good thing, and blah and blah, which still sort of links through to today. But as you can see, I'm not being mega careful, but you can just see that there's a tonal range being built. Now you see this being done with airbrushes as well. I'm a brush painter, I don't possess an airbrush. I think I've said this before, maybe one day I'll get an airbrush. But you don't need one. So, if you like all the toys, and what they really do is they facilitate painting very quickly. So yes, if you wish to paint faster and you wish to paint very beautifully, by all means get one. They will make your life easier once you've gotten used to them. I'm sure at first they're like, oh, what am I doing? But by the time you've messed up a couple of miniatures, you'll be good at them. This is what your spare plastic miniatures are for, or just your cheap plastic miniatures, or the miniatures you don't like, or the miniatures from the box set, which was a starter set, and it's the army you don't like, paint them first. Paint them. Use them as your test pieces. Get it all wrong, and it'll be fine. It'll be fine. I'm beginning to realise this may have not been entirely in focus. Apologies if that's the case, but you know, this is a paint along with me video. I'm really here just to burble and warble. Watching me painting dark grey onto a miniature is going to be terribly dull. I understand that. I just want you to be able to see that how even with just one tier of sort of, this isn't dry brushing, this is careful painting. And just the first tier of it here, it just starts to reveal the whole miniature. You allow the black to sit into the recesses, and with each tier of painting you highlight up. And this is the other thing I'm going to show you. This is sort of this is the ink technique. This is like super about inks, and but I think it'll suit Vallejo paints as well, because Vallejo paints are incredibly transparent. And so if you have a sort of highlighted surface, shaded highlighted surface, they will actually they will work for you. But you'll have to see and judge for yourself, and the tinting will come later. So once again, with these guys, they are sort of regulars, so I am just going to paint through all of these doing the dark grey. So what I'm hoping you can see right now though is that by doing this I've immediately started to reveal the detail. Because the other thing I'm doing here, you see, is literally everything is going to get tinted at the end. So I hope this is of some interest to you, of some use to you, and that you can find this interesting. So I'm going to crack on with this. I'll get all the dark grey on these guys. I'm going to try and get all of these guys tinted in this single video. I'll just do it in one session. So I'll catch you in a moment. Okay, so just moving on to the next colour. This is the mixture of the heavy charcoal grey and the heavy blue grey from the Vallejo extra opaque range, and just starting to layer on. It's about I don't know, 5 parts charcoal grey, 1 part blue grey, and this is just to start lightening it up. And you just keep on doing this and keep on doing this until you've got a tonal range that you're happy with. I'm still doing this as a pretty heavy coat, and yeah, it's marginally less fussy, but I want a steady gradated fade, and this is where you find the difference between airbrushing and brush painting. Airbrushing, you can do this just by letting the paint fade. Like you can pretty much let, if you know anything about using spray paint, it's sort of, you can just angle it and the fade will occur naturally with the way that the spraying mechanism works. Whereas with a brush, you kind of have to be, it's a little bit more labour intensive. You have to keep, and as you go further and further into it, you have to be more and more careful. So you see, I'm not being too careful here still. It's because I really do want to start lightening up the whole miniature. Because when I've got this up, one, this will facilitate my white. So all my white will come pre-shaded, and I'll probably take the entire miniature up to a white highlight so that it looks white, and then tint it back. But then it shouldn't need any further painting after the tint because it'll all be highlighted and shaded already. And so you're going for a high contrast colouring process. And even with areas that I want black, I will paint them black again afterwards. Now there's an argument that says you could do this as sort of you could go for a lighter, a 3-stage. But the other thing I'm trying to achieve here is I want an even graded tonal quality. And how also, if you want to paint miniatures black and have them looking really good, like a really nice deep looking black, this is the other way of doing that. You paint it right up and then you tint it afterwards. It's very labour intensive, but it will lead to a very sort of a rich, deep feeling black rather than a sort of shallow, I've just chucked an opaque colour over the top of everything black. You'll see that with the hair and weapons in this. What I'll probably end up doing with sort of the hair in particular is I will tint it one colour and then I will tint it black. And this will just be to create differentiation again, because as stated in other videos, it's all about differentiation. It's also one of the reasons for doing this highly gradated kind of colour scheme change pattern thing, because it creates a very ultimately subtle colour range. That is what I'm really going for. I mean, you can be super careful with this as well. I mean, I'm not being as careful as you could / should be. Sorry, I keep on taking it into a place where it's probably out of camera. I don't mean to. Just getting caught up in the moment of painting. So yeah, and as you can see, as you start doing the next layer, it becomes a little bit faster. The other thing that's quite nice about this as a process is by the time you've highlighted everything, you can actually really see every part of the miniature because you kind of painted everything properly already. Just trying to be certain that I've applied this to all the raised areas. Now the difference between this layer of painting and the first layer of painting is I don't want to go right into the recesses. I want to leave the dark charcoal grey in the recesses, so that we're working towards that kind of fully dark to light kind of colour spectrum, or light spectrum I suppose. So yeah, so now it's starting to pick out, just so you can see the difference. You see you're just starting to get a subtle lightness occurring. It might not really be visible on the camera, but the shading is beginning to get deeper and the light areas are starting to get light. Sorry, my paintbrush is in my mouth. I am a fool. It just happens that way. Okay, so I'm just going to crack on and get these guys done, and I'll be back in a moment. Just moving on, and again just lightening it up ever so slightly. I'm just kind of cutting blue-grey across, mixing it into the palette, trying to make sure that I mix it all pretty evenly so that I've got enough of the same tone to use on each of the miniatures. Now I'm trying to create something which is a slightly more distinct change in colour, and I'm just running this over sort of the broader areas. Again, this is like much more of a pseudo dry brush now, starting to move towards highlighting. It may seem that this is a kind of a lot of work, but actually it's quite a quick way to paint, because you're letting the brush and the paint do most of the work, and because you're not having to pick out details. Whereas when you're sort of trying to paint each and every panel individually, that takes a long time. There's no two ways about it, because you're trying to pick out every detail from square one, and this facilitates you not having to. So you should just be able to sort of start seeing that there's a real depth of shade highlighting coming together here now. And I will continue working this all the way up to white. And you should find that, I mean, the white will only be highlights except in areas that I actually want. I want things to be white. There are areas in which are white, and I might even not go quite up to white. I might sort of go up to like a virtually blue-grey, and then take other areas back down. Yeah, I might end up getting a bit obsessive about this as well. I don't know how many layers I'm going to do. Partly I don't mind doing quite a lot of layers though, because it's really nice kind of seeing the miniature come to life as you're dragging these highlights over them a layer at a time. Okay, so next stage we are on to the next grey. This one's a bit more noticeably lighter. But again, you can afford to be pretty unfussy about it. It's sort of black, dark grey, lighter grey again. And the tier after this will be moving into highlights, from which you start to get into sort of lights, and it'll bring it all the way up to white, but sort of the lightest tones will be around the face, and anything that I actually want to be something that is considered a white colour, I'll probably apply sort of a final tier of white to them, to those areas, in order to brighten them up and take advantage of the tonal range which has been built up underneath. This may on face value seem to be quite a slow process, but I mean, as I said before, it's deceptively quick. When you're at this kind of stage using wet paint rather than sort of semi-dry brushing, and that's the final tiers. I start moving towards more dry brushing technique. Dry brushing, if you don't know what it is it's where you take the paint and you remove most of it from the brush, like wipe it on a bit of toilet paper or whatever, or kitchen, or if you have like special paper, your special paper for doing this with. And you remove most of the paint, and then whatever is left, the pigment, is it'll only sort of catch on the raised areas, or it'll have a tendency to catch on raised areas rather than on the majority of areas. So like if you've got a heavily loaded brush, like a brush which is like this brush is, it's not entirely loaded with paint. Fully loaded would mean that every element of the brush contains a heavy quantity of both pigment and emulsifying agent. Whereas a lightly loaded brush is a brush that contains relatively little, particularly in the case of dry brush. You're trying to remove the emulsifying agent and minimise how much of that is contained within it. And if you can do that, you end up with pigment which then, if you dry brush, which is sort of what the technique is called, will then catch on the raised areas and sort of give you a highlight without really having to try very hard. This is still quite painterly. I'm trying to get into recesses still, because I want to get away from black. I want a kind of a tonal fade, not a if you're not careful, you just end up painting it grey and then grey and then grey, and it just gets lighter and lighter grey, and you don't get the fade into the shadows. But at the same note, if you don't use enough, you end up with black, white, and you don't get a gradation in the tonal quality. And I want the gradation. I want a well graded colour range. I don't want a sudden tonal transition, but I still want that sort of high definition black in the recesses. And I don't know, am I partly doing this, am I being lazy? I'm not really being lazy, I'm doing this because I thought it'd just be an interesting thing, because you don't really see sort of tabletop gamers. This is much more of a canvas painting style of painting, and the reason for that is you use the light and tone to sort of model / create a three-dimensional image, and then you tint it in order to give it life, like Frankenstein's monster. Live my fiend, fly my pretties, or what have you. Everything's pretty full on. So yeah, as you can see, it's just, don't be mega rushy. Also, these are my grunts for my JSA, so I'm not. I don't expect them to be immaculate looking. In actual fact, to be honest with you, nothing's going to be immaculate because I'm not that good enough painter. But specifically, I am trying to do everything pretty much on par. Also, I have a habit of doing. And I think what I'm going to do with these guys is what I call the army reward scheme, and you'll find it recommended in various things, and it's just a way of painting whereby you paint everything up to a certain standard, which is your standard for everything, and then people who perform well, they get more painting done to them, so their paint job improves over time, because there's no such thing as a finished paint job. You can see it in flat painting, you can see it in miniature painting. You can always add another layer of paint, unless it's so thick that you've already lost all the detail, but that means you undercoated wrong. Yeah, see videos about undercoating. Yeah, so that's dark grey. I'm just going to get all the other guys done and I'll get back to you in a moment. So once again, just tearing up to a slightly lighter tone again. Maybe not enough differentiation here, sorry. This is where it starts getting hard. I'm kind of part mixing this as I go, just to make sure that differentiation is high enough. And I really want to start introducing that differentiation now. This is going to be a sort of heading towards highlights layer. Doesn't mean that it's not getting quite a lot of coverage still, hence I'm using a proper brush rather than a dry brush. If you are going to dry brush, use an old brush. You will trash brushes dry brushing. I seem to be able to trash brushes when I'm wet painting, so imagine what I could do if I was dry brushing. And you end up with tons of old brushes. You know, when the bristles start to splay and spread, just keep them, use them as your dry brushes. Some people say you should trim the bristles. Me, just use the one which has the least rubbish bristles. That is my theory. Although sometimes I do actually trim brushes, and then I normally find that they're not really fit for purpose, and that annoys me. And so I use one which I haven't trimmed. You'll be amazed how often, in my instance anyway, in my case, that actually happens that way. I have tons of old brushes just sculling about, so you should be able to see that stuff's starting to come together a bit now. And apologies if there's any noises in the background, I'm just cracking on and keeping on working because time marches on and family is in and home downstairs and it's sort of tea time, so can't really complain, but just see that this is just sort of getting lighter and lighter, and each layer creates additional depth. And also, bizarrely, as you get further in like this, you can almost be less fussy about painting. As you're more and more interested in just the highlight rather than getting coverage. So the longer you're painting them for, the faster you paint. So as you can see, I've pretty much done this layer on this one. Just trying to make sure that I do get the barrel of the weapon, the undersides. Trying to get quite good coverage on the face. The face will pull virtually up to white. I'm assuming she's wearing gloves, so that's not a thing, but so then I'll just crack on and get the other guys done. I'll be back with you in a minute. Okay, so then this is a significant colour shift. We're going up to quite a light grey. The slower you can introduce the grey. But this is sort of layer 5. This is just starting to highlight. I say starting because it's not, it's still like quite painterly. But now you see I'm just trying to catch leading edges. A little bit of panels, and when I say panels I mean sort of flat areas of colour. I don't want this to be covering, but what I do want this to do is to start revealing details. So that I'm leaving recesses with good paint coverage. And getting this done. Even go so far as to say, oops, sorry, that's me trying to throw things around. If I'm getting down to the boots here, just carefully paint, starting to sort of carefully pick out some panels now, because this is a sufficiently light colour where it will potentially really miniature. Same at the back here, pick out the sides. Combat wedges of the future. If we're going to have ladies in the army, they have to be allowed to have combat wedges, surely. Because a heel is the most practical thing to have when you're out there, out in the field, looking good. So, I hope the modern military learns from this. If you wish to employ women on the front line, you must have appropriate footwear, appropriate trendy footwear. Yeah, I hate that word, that's why I'm using it, by the way. Yeah. The word trendy should abscond from the English dictionary. It's like that word that old people like me use, and it always sounds wrong. It's that trendy. your parents use. It's the word of parents. One day when you're a parent, you'll use it too. Or maybe you already are one, and you say that to your kids and they look like they're about to throw up. I vaguely remember that being how I felt when my parents were talking about things trending and stuff. It's like, oh God. Just let it go, Mum and Dad. Let it go. You are old. Again, just starting to pay a little bit more attention to painting in those panels on the boots. There's a bit splitting occurring in my brush. I should really replace it, but I just haven't got round to it really. You can see this is just starting to form ripples and waves, and you're starting to get a bit more clear definition between things. The other nice thing about this is, from my point of view anyway, seeing as how I seem to be a blind fool, so by doing this, before I start trying to pick out anything in colour, I can actually very clearly see what's what. And if you notice in the last, well, you should notice, it's pretty obvious, there are points where I was just like, well, I didn't see that. Didn't even realise that was there. And it's because, especially on teeny miniatures like these, I say teeny, true, proper, true scale 28mm. There's actually only very subtle differences between things. Some things that I am trying to fill as well are shoulder pads, faces. It's because I want quite a lot of, well, one, they'll be more visible, I want more attention, but also I want to tint them lighter. And as such, that means they have to go a lighter colour. Like I say, if I want these weapons black, they will get inked black. I'll tint them back again. Really not, it's not a non-plus, it's just a, just don't do it. And you see in places there, I'm just getting a little bit excessive, but also you'll notice that I'm not necessarily entirely filling areas anymore. And that's also what I mean, it's like let the highlights form by themselves, let the paint and the brush do the work for you. If the brush is running out of paint, well, just let it. You end up, I would refer to it as a painterly style. The advantage of an airbrush, again, in these circumstances, you get these sort of perfect fades. But they don't actually always look the best. Sometimes you see it hand painted mini and you're like, wow. Sometimes you see an airbrush mini and you're just like, lazy. And I think there are a lot of effects that you can do with airbrushes that kind of look good, but like when you do glowing things, you just get an airbrush spot and just spot it over the area, and it sort of, because it naturally disperses and fades. So, I don't think it looks very good. I think it looks lazy. I think if you dry brushed it in and then inked it, it actually ends up looking better. Mostly because you actually have more control over the dry brush than you ever do over an airbrush. Because an airbrush is a fixed rate, well, not entirely fixed rate, you can change the, the pressure in the airbrush. So my paintbrushes are just getting in my way. Damn them and their evil ways. You see, like here, I'm trying to work quite in, not so fussed about the hair, but the face in particular. I've got a loaded brush. I'll actually work that quite heavily with paint because I'm just trying to I want the flash tones, or I want the flash to end up flashy looking. And this would be the last tier of sort of painted grey, if you like. And then the next tier will probably be from here. We'll be moving into a dry brush of white. So you might think, oh, isn't that a big step up from that colour? But no, not really. Okay, so next I'm just going to put in the white. I've just got to get the other guys done. I'll be back in a minute. Now I swapped over to a dry brush. This is an old 00. And again, to begin with, I'm not too fussed about it. Okay, I am not fussed, that's too much. If you have too much, this is about getting the balance between pigment and everything right. So what I'm just looking to do is run this white highlight over everything. And you want this dry brush because you can work it over everything and it will just pick up leading edges. This is when you discover how well or how badly you removed flash and mould line, because this will pick up every last mould line and you'll hate yourself for not cleaning up your miniatures properly to begin with. You see, that's a bit too white there, but I just keep going, extend the pigment. You'll be surprised sometimes at the power of extending pigment. And then I will do a bit of a removal mission in there when I feel like it's too strong. And this does completely trash paintbrushes, so I'm just going to have to deal with that, I'm afraid. You see, this is the Vallejo. It's a very moist. It has a, I'm not sure what it is, but it appears to have a high, very don't know what the right word is because it's not to do with viscosity. It's to do with it's to do with. It's like a very, very slippery, moist one. So like. It extends the paint really, really well, which is why it gives you these. It's a very transparent paint. Like by itself, a single brush of it, you can extend it very far. It will get very, very thin, but it'll keep going, which is actually a nice quality. Not that I'm not particularly used to using paint in this manner, but it's sort of like, see, it's a non-dense paint. It may seem like I'm being a bit heavy-handed here, but I am not. Because do remember that this is going to get tinted, which means that all of this highlighting, all of this, it's all going to get knocked back again, so you can actually afford to be pretty carefree about the whole thing. And this will create a sort of, like I say, it's a black and white effect where your miniature starts looking like it's in a black and white photo. And in places I might have let it get too thick. Like on the arm here, that might be a bit much, but then these arms are probably going to come up to white anyway, because it's JSA, white and red colour scheme. I never paint white and red, by the way. I never paint red. I've never been a fan of red armies. Even in historical, I always ended up painting like, I painted white, I suppose, because I was just ended up painting like the French. who historically had periods where they wore white uniforms, especially like 7 Years' War. So I did spend some time painting them. But particularly, so I never painted red coats, so I never ended up painting red armies really. So these guys will be my first red army, and my army, which is even weirder because normally I go for sort of somebody who is going to be green. So then the final thing I'm just doing on all of these guys is I'm just carefully bringing the face up lighter than everything else. And this, for me at least, is pretty important. Because what it does is it facilitates a skin tone. I'm not just going to bring this up, in fact this brush is a bit rubbish. I'm just going to use my proper detail brush. Not sure if I've got quite enough white paint left. This is, no I don't. Okay, now I do. This is kind of important. It's just getting the sense of the paleness of skin. Also, you always want the face to stand out from everything else, right? Whenever you're painting miniatures, normally you try and make the face stand out, sort of, because otherwise it can all start blurring together, blending together, and you end up with a kind of characterless miniature. Whereas by doing this, you've already established the importance of the face on the miniature and starting to draw attention, so when you are toning everything back, the face is that bit brighter than everything else. I don't actually like working from a white undercoat, although like I say, at some point I'm going to do some watercolory type stuff, and that will be from a white undercoat, but that's like different, because that's like special reasons, because I'm very special. And the only other thing I'm going to apply this to in this way is I'm just going to start touching in these shoulder pads. And this just starts to create like quite a lot of definitive differences. And I'll show you the other guys once they're done as well. So I'll show you everybody once this phase is complete. And you can kind of see how I would have just been touching everything in like this. Just getting that tonal variation. So all of the armour is getting lightened up. It's and again, it might have another tier of white put over the top of it again once this is dry, because everything. This also comes back to what I talked about earlier. You'll notice when this is done that the areas that I've repainted white look like white, but if you then repaint them again white, once again they will look white, and it will sort of knock everything back. So you can have this sort of ongoing. Like white's always a comparative grayscale, it's never actually a true colour, and if you ever actually saw the colour white you would go blind, because it would overload your eyes and actually completely ruin them, which is a funny fact. But your eyes won't let you see white, so don't worry about it. it is why the sun causes blindness though. Like looking at the sun is like looking at true white. You start to see, even though getting white in the gaps, there is a differentiation to the colours because of the translucency of the paint, and this is what facilitates the ability to tint. So yeah, there you have it. That phase essentially done. So I'm just going to get everything else done, and then I will maybe just remain a couple of extra highlights, make sure the tip of the barrel is. So I'm going to get all this finished up and I will show you everybody together. Catch you in a minute. Here is the black and white scale Keisotsu Butai, ready for the next phase of painting, which will be the tinting phase. So the nice thing about this is it makes it quite a quick painting technique, because even though you might spend 2-3 hours, I think it's taking me about 4 hours, 3 or 4 hours to get these guys all black and whited up, but that's partly because my battery died and I had to charge it and wait, and so that was an hour. I don't know, I think 2 or 3 hours maybe doing this. But then the next go, you're just literally picking out tints and letting the highlights sort themselves out. You notice that certain things I've picked out quite carefully, like faces. I'll give these a quick little turn so you can see them from different angles. And yeah, so I hope this has been of some interest and of some use to you guys. Come and paint with me anytime you like. I'm always here. And then I also hope that it's perhaps been a different kind of way of painting that you've not seen before and find useful from that perspective as well. Just trying to keep everybody in focus, sorry. Yeah, so cheers everybody. Take care and have a good one. Bye bye.